Hey everyone, Casual Console Gamer here with another review. This time we're checking out Armored Core 6 on the PlayStation 5. Like always, we'll start with the too long didn't watch. The Armored Core series has never been more accessible than with Armored Core 6. With improvements to controls and gameplay, it's taken a niche series and brought it into the mainstream. But if you're expecting a Darksouls with Mechs type of game because this was developed by Fromsoftware, you'll likely be disappointed. AC6 is Armored Core through and through, and newcomers may be put off by the combat and mission structure despite AC6 being the most streamlined in the series. I recommend you check out Armored Core 6 if you love mech games and were interested in the Armored Core series, but missed out on the previous entries.
Great, an independent merc. Who's the wise guy who decided the Red Gun should be taking care of some freelancers?
For technical and graphics, I played Armored Core 6 on the PS5 with the prioritized frame rate option selected. Trust me, with a game like AC6, you're going to want every frame available. This is a fast-paced game that requires split-second reaction. 30 FPS just isn't going to cut it. Thankfully, there wasn't a single FPS drop in my entire playthrough. Even when the screen was filled with enemies and streaks of energy weapons and salvos of missiles were obscuring everything in sight, the game performed perfectly. The mechs are detailed, the weapons attacks, colorful and vibrant, but the world can be quite plain at times. Most of the maps are small, with large skyboxes to give the illusion of scale. They are also reused quite a bit, with multiple missions taking place in the same location. When you get to one of the larger maps, AC6 can really leave you in awe of what Fromsoftware created. Your mech can be dwarfed by structures or large enemies, but you are hemmed into playable areas by invisible walls that can only be seen when you approach them. What can I say about the UI and the on-screen HUD? It's an Armored Core game, so expect the screen to be filled with numbers and energy bars. But compared to the previous entries in the Armored Core series, this is a massive improvement, especially since they went with white instead of the colorful greens or blues of the past. Cinematics are short, mostly taking place at the end of missions. Most of the story is told to you in the garage before and after every mission, with characters talking on a screen represented by their emblem, so there are no player characters anywhere in AC6. The story is definitely the weakest part of Armored Core 6, relying on multiple playthroughs and the willingness of players to search out information into the motivations of characters, the lore surrounding the energy source Coral, and the fires of Rubicon. If you haven't played any of the Armored Core games before, don't worry about not knowing the story going into AC6. Like other Fromsoftware games, the story isn't connected to any of the other games aside from a few vague references. AC6 tells its own tale, taking place on the planet Rubicon, where corporations are fighting over a fuel source called Coral. It's a simple story, with a lot of it left to the player to fill in the blanks from character descriptions in the arena, items in your inventory, or piecing information together from subsequent playthroughs. Like Darksouls, AC6 has a New Game Plus system, and in order to get all of the endings, you will need to play through the complete game at least 3 times. But the benefit of doing so is new mission decisions and the opportunities that expand the lore and give you a different perspective on the conflict and your role in it. Gameplay is where Armored Core 6 is at its strongest, but as I said in the TLDW, if you are coming in expecting Dark Souls and Mechs, you're going to be disappointed. FromSoft kept the formula of the previous AC titles, refining and streamlining their gameplay, but leaving the fundamentals unchanged. Missions are short, each starting in the garage where you will customize your mech and weapon loadout for the upcoming mission. You'll get a brief summary of what to expect, but a lot of the time it's trial and error. Will you be going across a large map with a lot of pitfalls? Then you'll likely need a light mech with speed, agility, and flight options. You're going into combat against a lot of weak enemies? You should probably equip weapons with high ammo count so that you don't run out halfway through the mission. Or maybe you're going to be fighting another AC or boss. Then you might want a heavy mech with a lot of health and weapons capable of stun locking them and dealing high amounts of damage. If you spec incorrectly for the mission, it's not the end of the world. Missions are short enough that quitting and going back to the garage to respec isn't onerous. At worst, you lose maybe 5 or 10 minutes of progress. There are checkpoints in most missions as well, so if you die, you can adjust your loadout according to the situation, as long as you have purchased the parts you need beforehand. For example, if you're in a light mech with weak weapons and you come upon a tough enemy and you die, you can just switch out your components, reload the last checkpoint, and try again. There's a handy AC data feature that allows you to save your customized mechs, so try to always have a few that you like for different situations. I personally always had a heavy mech for the arena and boss battles, while I also had a light, speedy one for just regular missions. By the end of the game, I had nearly a dozen loadouts, all with different strengths and weaknesses and their various uses. It's expected that you will enter a mission without the proper equipment. Failure and dying is never a terrible thing in AC6, just like in Darksouls. If you fail, you go back, you adapt, you adjust, and you try it again. Invariably, you will have customized your AC poorly, either being too slow for a section requiring speed and a light mech, or you encounter trash mobs when you had high-powered, low-ammo weapon loadout, or you're just too light and easy to kill when you're fighting a boss or another AC. But as I said before, missions are short. You will spend nearly an equal amount of time in the garage adjusting your loadout and purchasing things from the shop as you will fighting enemies. There is a ton of equipment to choose from. You can assign weapons to both your hands and your shoulders. They also come in a variety of ranges, from melee all the way up to long range. Missiles, lasers, kinetic energy weapons, the list goes on. The game really encourages you to experiment, but I did find that the balance was never perfect. It's clear that there are weapons and loadouts that are just better than others. I won't give out any spoilers here, but there is a group of weapons and an AC build that dominates Arena, and every boss you face is not even close and requires no skill whatsoever to pull off. That was a major thing I found with AC6. While player skill is certainly a factor to pull off some of the weaker or faster builds, your loadout matters much more. If you spec correctly, the game is much more forgiving with your skill level. But that changes when you play online. The Nest feature lets you fight other players, and you'll find that what worked in single player is really useless out in the real world. So if you're playing online, my suggestion is to find a playstyle that you like and hone it through experience. Purchasing new equipment requires money, which you can earn from the missions you complete. If you find yourself short on cash, you can replay completed missions as many times as you want for additional rewards. To help with experimentation, you can also sell parts for their purchase price, allowing you to swap and test out different builds without any sort of penalty. Your overall money is more of a cap on your builds. And if you sell the parts but still have the AC data saved, you can easily repurchase what you sold. Just remember that you don't have access to the parts shop when you die in a mission, and if you want to swap loadouts, even if you have the AC data saved, you need those parts in your inventory. So if you want multiple loadouts to choose from for various situations, always have those parts in hand. Let's talk about the controls. Armored Core games have a reputation for their unwieldy and difficult to learn controls, to the point where the developers joke that there's a special way to hold the controller. Players often said you needed more thumbs or another hand to excel in the AC series. Thankfully, AC6 streamlined their gameplay, and this is the most accessible it's ever been. But it's still an AC game, so expect a learning curve. You're going to be spamming both triggers and bumpers, dodging and boosting, all while trying to switch between multiple enemies. It's quick and engaging, but can be hard to keep track of for beginners. Just remember, if you're having trouble, try switching your loadout to something that matches your preferred playstyle, and replay old missions to see if you can improve your gameplay. Like Dark Souls, AC6 has a New Game Plus system. The first time you complete the game, you're really only seeing some of the story. In New Game Plus, you get new missions and decisions that change both the story and the ending. You need to complete the game at least 3 times before you see all the missions and endings. Depending on your skill level and how quickly you can run through those levels, it could take you only 30 or 40 hours to do everything in this game. New Game Plus doesn't make the game harder. The enemies have the same health and deal the same damage. You get to keep all your parts and the money you earned in your previous playthrough. The only difference is some of the New Game Plus missions can be harder than the normal playthrough versions. Difficulty is something that AC6 hasn't balanced perfectly. There are numerous missions where you will steamroll everything in a few minutes flat, while others will have you hitting a brick wall and trying over and over again. If things do get hard, try swapping your loadout and try something different. Aside from destroying everything in sight, the missions have hidden parts to find, secret ACs to fight, and logs to collect. Unfortunately, you will see a lot of the same map being reused multiple times, even if you don't replay your completed missions. Overall, I love the gameplay in Armored Core 6, but I do recognize that the Armored Core games were always pretty niche, and although AC6 does a lot to improve upon it, the gameplay won't be for everyone.
I'm assigning you the call sign Gun 13, a lucky little number that just became available. Gun 13, sound off! Good enough. Now go get ready! We're going on a field trip, kiddo!
I'm not going to lie to you. The voice acting in this game is terrible. You have voice actors trying to convey a gruff, military drill sergeant kind of way of speaking, and it's just hilariously bad. Even the best voice actors in AC6 are just fine, but not great. Thankfully, if the cringe does get too much for you, you have the option to switch to the Japanese language, although I found it hard to follow the subtitles during missions. There are no microtransactions in Armored Core 6. At the time of writing this review, there's also no DLC announced. There were pre-order bonuses and collector's editions giving access to premium AC parts, but you could also collect them in-game anyway. It just gave you early access to those parts, and they weren't particularly powerful compared to what you received earlier. Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon is the best Armored Core has been, but it's still an Armored Core game. There's a reason it was a niche series, and while AC6 streamlined the gameplay significantly, the controls and mission structure may not appeal to everyone. As a fan of Armored Core, I absolutely loved it, and I usually rate games on recommend and a do not recommend basis. I absolutely do recommend everyone check this out if you're a fan of the Armored Core games and mech combat.